Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive. This time, we're looking at Neogen Chemicals Ltd. They're making waves in the Indian chemical industry, and
Definitely a company to watch.
for sure,
Right.
they're doing some really interesting stuff, especially with the whole electric vehicle thing that's happening.
Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of people are just seeing like the quarterly report headlines, but we're going to go deeper. We'll really
Yeah.
unpack what makes them tick, how they're riding this EV wave, and, why should you care?
Yeah, why should our listeners care? So let's start with the basics. What is Neogen Chemicals? What do they do?
So Neogen's actually been around for a while, founded back in 1991.
Oh, wow.
But they've really come into their own in recent years. They're essentially a specialty chemicals manufacturer. So think, pharmaceuticals,
Okay.
agrochemicals, even flavorings in your favorite snacks. Neogen's probably involved somewhere along the line.
Wow, so they're not like a niche player. They're
Oh,
kind of like all over the place.
exactly. That's one of the things that makes them so interesting. They're not, betting on a single industry. They've got this diversified portfolio, which helps them kind of weather the ups and downs of the market.
Right, right. And speaking of ups and downs, the chemical industry has been having, some issues lately.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
There's supply chain stuff, rising material costs, less demand in certain sectors.
Yeah.
So how is Neogen dealing with all that?
Well, their Q2 FY25 results give us some clues, I think. So despite all those challenges, their consolidated revenue jumped 20% year over year,
Wow.
which is pretty impressive. It hit 193.4 crore rupees. Even their standalone revenue, which is just focused on their Indian operations, that saw a decent 4% growth.
Okay, so they are growing, but revenue is only part of the picture.
Yeah.
What about the actual profits? Are they just expanding for the sake of it, or is there substance to these numbers?
Right. That's a real question, right? And this is where it gets interesting. So they actually managed to improve their profit margins despite all the cost pressures and everything.
Hmm.
So their consolidated profit after tax, PAT, surged by a whopping 38%, hit 11 crore rupees.
Wow.
And even their standalone PAT saw a 43% increase. That's
huge.
that's pretty big.
Yeah.
And to me, that signals that they're running a pretty tight ship, being very efficient.
Yeah, that's remarkable, especially considering they're also putting all this money into their new battery materials division, Neogen Ionics.
Right.
It's clear they're like going all in on electric vehicles. What's the game plan there?
Yeah, they're not just dipping their toes, they're diving in headfirst. So Neogen Ionics is setting up this massive manufacturing facility for electrolytes and lithium salts. Those are two of the key ingredients you need for EV batteries. And we're talking about a 1,500 crore rupee investment. That's serious money. But here's the thing. It's not just about getting, a slice of the EV pie. It's about becoming a dominant player, especially in the US.
Okay, now you've got my attention.
Yeah.
How does that investment give them an edge over, players who are already there, who are already established?
So think about it. By scaling up production so rapidly, they could potentially undercut, like Chinese suppliers on price.
Oh, okay.
And with the U.S. Inflation Reduction Act pushing for, non-Chinese sources of battery materials,
Right.
that puts Neogen in a really prime position to really win big.
So they're not just riding the wave, they're like strategically positioning themselves.
Yeah.
That's really smart. But what makes you think they can actually pull this off? What evidence do we have? What shows us that they're not just, hyping things up?
Well, the good news is they're already shipping trial batches of their battery materials, and the feedback's been positive. But even more importantly, they're already in talks with major battery manufacturers for long-term supply contracts. So that tells me they're not just, building a factory, they're building partnerships. They're securing their spot in that EV supply chain.
So they're walking the walk.
Yeah.
I'm impressed. But before we get, too caught up in the EV excitement,
Sure.
they're still a chemicals company at heart.
Right, of course.
What's going on that front?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. While the battery division is grabbing headlines, they haven't forgotten their roots. In fact, they're expanding their existing organic and inorganic chemicals businesses, which are still bringing in a ton of revenue.
Right.
But here's where it gets even more interesting. They're venturing into what they call high-end complex chemistries.
High-end complex chemistries. That sounds intriguing.
Yeah.
Can you give me like a solid example? What kind of products are we talking about?
So the reports don't get into specifics, unfortunately. But It definitely hints at Neogen's commitment to innovation and like their desire to really push the boundaries. They're not content with just riding existing trends. They want to shape the future of the chemical industry.
That's a bold statement.
Yeah.
I'm very curious to see what they come up with.
Me too. But it raises an interesting question. How does a company balance the excitement of new ventures like battery materials with the steady growth of their established businesses?
Yeah, that's a really good point. It's a tough balancing act.
Yeah. And on top of that, we have to consider the impact of fluctuating lithium prices. So their inorganic chemicals business, which includes lithium-based products, is directly affected by those swings.
Right. Yeah.
So that adds a layer of complexity to their financial performance, makes things a bit more up and down.
A bit of a roller coaster on the lithium front. So all of this begs the question, what's Neogen's leadership saying about all this? Are they optimistic, concerned? What's their take?
Well, the reports actually quote Mr. Haridas Kanani, the chairman and managing director. He acknowledges the challenges, the market conditions, but he also expresses confidence in Neogen's ability to adapt and deliver value. He actually goes so far as to say that he sees Neogen Ionics as a major growth driver in the coming years.
That's good to hear, a leader who's realistic but also optimistic. So it sounds like they're not putting all their eggs in one basket.
Right.
They're still focused on the core chemical business, exploring these new opportunities in those high-end complex chemistries you talked about, and trying to navigate the whole lithium market.
Yeah, and don't forget their commitment to research and development. They have 2 dedicated R&D units and a team of 90 scientists, including 10 PhDs.
Wow.
That's a pretty serious investment in innovation.
That is impressive. But what I'm really curious about is the company culture.
Yeah.
Are they all, lab coats and beakers, or is there something more to it? I
Yeah.
feel like a company venturing into, cutting edge stuff like battery materials has to have a pretty unique vibe.
Yeah, I think you're right to be curious about that. And based on what we've read, it seems like a pretty hands-on environment. Both the chairman and managing director are actively involved in the R&D process. They're not just signing off on budgets. They're really in the trenches, which fosters that culture of innovation from the top down.
That's interesting.
Yeah, that's really says something. That kind of involvement from the top. It shows they're serious about like pushing the limits of what's possible in the chemical industry. But let's shift gears a bit and dig into their financials a little deeper. Neogen has a history of stronger performance in the second half of the fiscal year. Have you noticed that trend at all?
I was actually just going to ask you about that. Why is the second half usually better for them? Is it just random or something else going on?
It's definitely not random. There are a couple of seasonal drivers that really come into play. So first, they tend to see this surge in demand from Europe in the second half, especially after the holidays. And second, the demand for lithium-based chemicals, which is a key part of their portfolio, that usually peaks in Q4. It's mainly driven by increased capital expenditure in the heating, ventilation, and air conditioning segment, HVAC.
Okay, so they've got these like built-in boosts, these seasonal tailwinds
Yeah, exactly.
that help them out. Got it. But what about the bigger picture? What does their long-term financial health look like? Are they in a good spot to, keep growing and innovating?
Well, if we look at their historical financials, the picture's quite positive. So their revenue has grown consistently over the past 5 years, and profitability has been steadily increasing. Plus, their net worth has been on an upward trajectory, which points to a pretty solid foundation.
Okay, so they're financially sound, they're investing in R&D, they're strategically expanding, like we talked about, into these new markets, the EV battery materials. But here's something that often gets overlooked: their commitment to corporate social responsibility. The reports highlight several of their initiatives in areas like healthcare, education, and environmental sustainability.
Right, that's a great point. It's easy to focus on just the numbers and the growth, but a company's impact goes way beyond that.
Yeah.
And Neogen seems to get that. It looks like they're taking this holistic approach,
Yeah.
recognizing that their success is tied to their employees, the communities they operate in, the environment.
And it's nice to see a company that's not just about the profits, but actually making a positive impact.
Absolutely, yeah.
So we've covered a lot in this deep dive.
Hmm.
Their financial performance, the move into EV battery materials, their dedication to R&D, and even their commitment to corporate social responsibility. As we start to wrap things up, what are your key takeaways? What really stands out as important for our listener to remember about Neogen?
Hmm. I think the biggest takeaway for me is that Neogen is a company in motion, you know?
Yeah.
They're navigating this complex and constantly changing market, but they're doing it with agility and a vision for the future. They're not afraid to make bold investments, and they have this proven track record of innovation and actually getting things done.
I totally agree. They're definitely a company to watch. As we head into the final part of our deep dive, I want to leave our listeners with something to think about. The battery materials market is super competitive, right? With these big players from all over the world.
Oh, yeah.
Do you think Neogen, as a relative newcomer, can they use their, early mover advantage in India to actually make a splash on the global stage?
That's the big question, isn't it? It's a high stakes game. They definitely have the ambition, the technical know-how to compete, and by aligning their expansion with the growth of the EV market in India,
Yeah.
they're building a strong base.
But it's not going to be easy, right?
Oh, absolutely not. No, they've got to, outmaneuver these giants with deep pockets and global reach. They got to keep up with, battery technology, which changes constantly. And let's not forget the volatility of the lithium market.
Right.
That can make forecasting a nightmare.
So how do you think they can, actually overcome these challenges and,
Yeah.
Go global? What are the key factors that will decide if they succeed or fail?
I think it boils down to a few things. First, they need to execute their strategy perfectly.
Right.
It's one thing to have a plan, but actually bringing it to life, efficiently and effectively, that's a whole other thing. Second, they need to build strong partnerships.
Yeah.
In the global battery materials market, collaboration is essential. They need to work closely with the, battery manufacturers, car makers, even governments.
Right.
And lastly, they need to be adaptable. This market is always changing, new technologies, regulations, all that. They need to anticipate and respond quickly.
Those are some really good points. Execution, partnerships, adaptability.
Yeah.
Those are the things that will make or break them. But here's another thought. How do they go after global dominance in battery materials while still maintaining and growing their existing chemical businesses?
Yeah.
How do they avoid, spreading themselves too thin and losing focus?
Yeah. Yeah. It's like you climb the ladder and then you got to figure out how to build a whole new ladder while you're still standing on the first one.
Exactly. And for Neogen, it's even trickier because this battery materials thing isn't just like, adding on to what they already do. It's a completely different game.
Yeah.
They're basically building a whole new business,
Yeah.
which takes a different, skill set, resources, a different mindset even.
So how do you think they're going to juggle all that? What can they do to make sure both parts of the business do well?
Well, one thing they could do is create separate business units, with clear goals and leadership.
Yeah. That way each unit can focus on what it needs to do without getting in each other's way. And they got to be smart about resources too. Can't just throw everything at the battery division and ignore the core chemical business, which is still making the money, right?
Right. Makes sense.
Yeah.
But it's not just about structure and money, is it? It's also about the people. Do they have the right people to run both these things at the same time?
That's a huge point. They'll need leaders who aren't just experts, but who can adapt, think strategically.
Mm-hmm.
People who can handle a market that's changing all the time. They might even need to look outside the company to find the right people.
It'll be really interesting to see how they handle all this. It's a real test for them, But that's what makes this so interesting, right? We're seeing a company at this, turning point.
Yeah.
What they do now will decide where they go from here.
Totally.
Mhm.
And it reminds us that things never stay the same in business. The companies that can change, come up with new ideas, and execute well, those are the ones that'll succeed. And Neogen seems to get that, which is why it's so fascinating to follow them.
For sure. So to our listeners, keep an eye on Neogen Chemicals. They're a company with a great story, a bold vision, and the potential to really shake things up in the chemical industry.
Yeah. And as you watch them, think about this. What's it going to take for an Indian company to break into that global battery materials market? And what could that mean for the EV industry, for the whole global energy scene? Big questions to think about.
Definitely food for thought. Well, that's it for this deep dive. We hope you enjoyed this look at Neogen Chemicals. Until next time, keep learning, keep asking questions, and keep diving deep.